to the Happy Lawyer Project. I'm your host, Akoma Muronu, and I created this show to help lawyers find happiness in life with a law degree. Together with my guest, we provide the knowledge, skills, insight, inspiration, and encouragement you need to find your happy. If you're a longtime listener, you probably know that I've had a lot of legal tech founders on the show. From Joel Cohen, who started Talks on Law, to Julia Shapiro, who does Hire and Esquire. And today I have on another founder, Felicity Conrad. She started Paladin, which is a pro bono management system for in-house counsel. Whether you're someone who's interested in starting something of your own, or just someone who's interested in learning more about what it takes to really pursue a dream and go down the path of the less traveled, this is a really great episode, and Felicity just has a great energy about her, and I'm really excited to share our conversation. I hope you guys enjoy it. Welcome, Felicity Conrad, to the show. I am so excited to welcome you to the Happy Lawyer Project here today.
Thank you so much. Happy to be here.
So I'd love if you could just start by sharing a brief description of who you are and how it is you got to where you are today.
Sure. It is not a linear journey, but of course happy to share. So originally I'm actually a Canadian, as it happens. I grew up on Vancouver Island in Canada, so near Vancouver, but a very kind of small and natural, beautiful place. I ended up going to college at McGill, which is in Montreal, a fantastic place, which I highly recommend. I was really interested in international kind of affairs and human rights and all of the kind of the global stage, as it were, and wanted to be a part of it. While I was there, I actually had the opportunity of doing kind of a semester of field studies in East Africa. And that really kind of drove home to me that I was interested in human rights and impact and hopefully kind of making the world a better place. It also kind of struck me while I was there that I had absolutely no like tangible skills or tools with which to make the world a better place. So I decided I would go to law school.
Fair enough.
So that experience fostered a little bit more interest in law as a really powerful tool for change. I went to NYU, and after NYU, I ended up going into private practice at Skadden. And while I was there, it's kind of still in the international realm, but I was part of the International Litigation and Arbitration Group, which is a fantastic group at Skadden. And after a couple years there, I took my perhaps like least linear leap yet, which was I left to start a pro bono tech company called Paladin. And that's what I've been doing for the last 2 years.
So I'm super excited to chat with you about Paladin. But before we transition to that, we talked about this a little before the show. I would be interested in your thoughts on, I've noticed that a number of my entrepreneurial guests started at Skadden. Do you have any thoughts about why Skadden may attract that personality type, or why it's a good breeding place for those types of personalities?
Yeah, that's super interesting. A couple people in my class have left and have actually done kind of entrepreneurial things. So I do think it's true. I guess what I would say, obviously Skadden attracts like cream of the crop, overachieving types, but I think that's kind of common to kind of the top tier of BigLaw. But the thing perhaps that maybe sets it apart for me is that I think that a lot of folks who end up at Skadden are particularly business-minded. And I think that that's really under kind of utilized more generally in law is in order to be a good lawyer, but certainly to be a good entrepreneur, you have to understand business. And so the closer you can get to the line of law and business, the better of a lawyer you'll be. And then maybe you'll start getting enchanted with the business side and go over into that world. When I was there, they were actually starting a program, which was a mini MBA. So for the first 3 months that I was at Skadden, I actually didn't practice law at all. I went through an MBA program and learned a lot of business things that I had no idea about, and I think were actually really helpful.
I love that. I was actually at Millbank, and we had a Millbank at Harvard program where we went to Harvard and did business school classes. And I thought that was so rewarding and really did help me in my practice and help me understand my clients and the way they think and how I could support them better. And I was like shocked that law schools don't do it.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I think that in order to be a good lawyer, you have to be very empathetic, and often your clients are businesses. And so in order to be empathetic to the business, you have to understand the business goals, and that takes a certain kind of foundation.
Absolutely. And so let's transition a little into your decision to start your own business. Mm-hmm. I often find that people start businesses for lots of reasons, but generally it's because they see a hole in the market and they think they can fill that hole, or there's a product out there that they themselves just want, and then they have the balls to create it. How did you land on this idea?
It was a little bit of column A, a little bit of column B. While I was litigating, I did do a lot of pro bono work, and I can't recommend highly enough doing pro bono work, particularly as a junior lawyer. It's how you get experience, but it's also how you really get in touch with your power as a lawyer, I think. For me, I took on an asylum case as a first-year litigator and was able to go to immigration court and prove that my client and his family faced very serious consequences if they were going to be deported, maybe even death. And as a result, they were allowed to stay. It was just one of those very profound moments that, like, you don't have to be a public interest lawyer to have that kind of experience. You can be a litigator in BigLaw and change people's lives very tangibly. So that was something that I was doing and at Skadden, and I knew that I cared about that kind of thing, but it was a bit of a news flash to me just how impactful it could be to me. And I became very passionate about kind of getting more lawyers to do pro bono work. So it was my personal experience, but then I looked around and there's so many lawyers in private practice who have skills that can absolutely change people's lives. And I saw a role for technology in helping to get more lawyers to do that.
So you actually have a business partner in this endeavor, and unfortunately she wasn't able to join us today, but I would be interested in knowing how you guys met and decided to team up on this project.
Yeah, absolutely. So my partner's name is Kristen Sonday. She's actually in San Francisco right now. She's a Google for Entrepreneurs Code 2040 diversity entrepreneur, and she does kind of incredible work in raising awareness and support for diverse entrepreneurs, which I think is particularly important right now. We initially met through a mutual friend, another entrepreneur, and it was kind of a social thing. I had recently left my role at Skadden to focus on this full time, and we ended up just hitting it off and staying up all night talking about what we were trying to do with Paladin. Her background, she was a first gen to college Latina and has kind of grown up with a very strong sense of purpose and a strong sense of justice and wanting to improve the lives of diverse and disadvantaged populations. So she, out of school, worked at the DOJ and then transitioned to the tech world. And when I met her, she was working at a hedge fund, and I convinced her over the course of a couple months to leave and join me full time. So she's very much kind of on the business tech operations side, and I was very much from the legal public interest pro bono side.
If you don't mind me asking, how did you fund kind of your initial round of all of this? Because it seems like you left your job before you had this up and running, so you didn't have income coming in from you.
Yeah, I mean, that is bootstrapping, and it is not glamorous. I think that if you see like Silicon Valley or a lot of the tech shows, you think it's sexy from day one. Like, no, it's definitely not. And I think particularly lawyers kind of expect a certain level of perfectionism or a sense of immediate progress that they will have figured out on day one. And if they don't, it's not worthwhile. So for me, it was really kind of a tricky period and a frankly gigantic leap of faith. I think it's important to set milestones of here's what I want to kind of understand or know or have achieved by a certain time to decide whether I want to continue, but also a certain sense of forgiveness if you don't achieve those milestones, because particularly in the world of entrepreneurship, things happen. So I would say, I mean, it's important to have perhaps a bit of cushion, financially speaking, when you leave, but I think there's a lot of people, and maybe especially lawyers, I'm not sure, who will wait until they feel like they're ready or that they've had enough. And I think that's often a little bit too long.
That's one of my favorite quotes. If you wait until it's perfect, you've waited too long.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I'd be interested to know, to dive in a little bit more on kind of your own personal self-talk that gets you through those times. Because I think you're right on when you say that lawyers expect things to be right, professional, perfect right out of the gate. And I think that for a lot of us high achievers, and I would group myself in this category because, as I'm ashamed to admit, I've had this podcast for a year, but cannot seem to launch a website because it's never perfect enough.
Mm-hmm.
And I do struggle. I struggle with kind of overcoming that sense of it's good enough.
Mm-hmm.
And I'd be interested to know kind of what do you say to yourself to give yourself that sense of grace? How do you push through it? What works for you when you feel like you're not meeting your own expectations?
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's universal and it's okay. It's just a question of, okay, like, how do you manage it? For me, a lot of it was like surrounding myself with people who would support me and who frankly knew more about what they were doing than I did. There's a great kind of quote or idea that you are the combination of the 5 closest people to you. So surround yourself with really good people who won't believe kind of your own bullshit and will get you out of your head every once in a while. But I mean, a lot of it's just practice. I would practice in the early days. I'd try to get rejected 5 times a day, just so I would become a little bit desensitized to feeling rejection, because rejection for me is a rather painful emotion. I don't like the feeling of being embarrassed. So I would kind of intentionally, occasionally try to embarrass myself and get used to it. There's, especially in the world of entrepreneurship, you have to let people in the early stages, or else you'll invest in a course that's incorrect. And when you know that, and when you unveil it in the grand reveal, you'll know too late that you made the wrong decision. You have to kind of put things out there purposefully that are half-baked and get feedback, because you're not the smart person. You're the person building things. Your users or your clients, those are the ones who will actually tell you what's right, what's not. It's just your job to make it real. So it was a bit of a shift for me to understand that failure is an opportunity. And if you wait too long and if you get too many yeses, or I haven't gotten enough feedback, that was actually a sign that I was not actually being a very efficient or effective entrepreneur.
I really like that. And it's actually something I've talked about on the show before, is that in my everyday life, when things start to feel like I'm never really afraid or unsure about the next course of action, it's because I'm always choosing the safe option.
Yeah, totally. And I think that there's so much of that. Yes, that applies to entrepreneurship, but it really also applies to legal practice. If you're not pushing yourself in interesting directions or trying something creative, you're probably not being a very good lawyer or a very high-level lawyer. A lot of it is about creativity, problem solving, audaciousness. So I think there's a lot of lessons that you can bring from that back into legal practice.
Yeah, no, there's certainly a balance there. And I think that you explained it really well, kind of the balance between humility of admitting when you don't know and getting the right feedback and getting the right people around you to help lift you up when you have learning to do. But then also kind of having that courage and sense of self-confidence to take the risk when you have made the decision that it's the right risk to take.
Totally. Yeah. No, and it is both.
So now let's transition into what you do. So let's talk about Paladin. What is it? How does it work? Let's get into the nitty-gritty of it.
Yeah, sure. So it took kind of a long time for us to settle on what it is now. So after like a year of user testing, of being in beta, of kind of trying different things and then trying other different things, we launched this year a software product to help. We're initially focusing on Fortune 500 legal teams. And so our software helps them manage all aspects of their pro bono program. And we're kind of the first to do that, which is really exciting. So from the time that the coordinator hears of a pro bono opportunity, they're able to put it into the system, send it to lawyers via email. Lawyers can browse opportunities, take on cases through the click of a button, and the administrators can have a bird's eye view of who's doing what, where, when, and actually understand the impact of their program and have some very, very pretty data analytics and graphs and things like that. So instead of kind of having email and Word documents and spreadsheets and end of year reporting takes like 100 hours to figure out who they actually helped, you can see the impact of lawyers doing really wonderful things at any given moment.
I love that you guys are bringing pro bono in-house, because I actually just 2 months ago moved in-house.
Oh, congratulations.
Thank you. And one of the things that I did weigh, there were lots and lots of considerations, but I definitely was nervous about kind of not having support to do pro bono. My GC is lovely, and the reason that I took this job, and I knew he would be really supportive of whatever I wanted to do, but it's such a lean and small legal team that the idea of doing it on my own was just really not an option. And I know that you guys are currently focusing on Fortune 500 companies, but I think something like this would just be so wonderful for small legal teams and, lawyers who want to do that, but just don't have the bandwidth, but to kind of source it on their own.
Yeah, totally. And I think there's so many possibilities there, but you put your finger on it. Corporate lawyers are, I think, in many ways, a especially underutilized population that really does want to get involved. Most people go to law school because they want to help people. And a lot of lawyers end up in private practice in-house. So it's important to kind of create tools for them to connect with their communities just like anyone else.
And what kind of pro bono opportunities are these? Because I'm a transactional lawyer, and I generally find that pro bono leans more towards litigation. What are your thoughts?
So it depends on the organization. We don't kind of source pro bono opportunities directly from organizations, but we can introduce folks to some wonderful legal service organizations out there. The work they do is truly inspiring. And the work runs the gamut. Obviously, immigration has been really, really popular and important this past year. And so a lot of folks are getting involved in that. But for corporate lawyers, I think the corporate lawyers often think that they can't get involved in other types of pro bono, but they absolutely can. And it can be incredibly rewarding, especially if they kind of choose an area and kind of get involved in it over time. But even with respect to just sharpening their corporate skills, there's 1.4 million nonprofits in the United States, and almost all of them, the statistics differ, but the significant majority have pro bono legal needs. There's so much corporate pro bono work out there for corporate attorneys to do, and there's a number of great organizations who help kind of scope those projects and bring them to legal teams. So I think that's actually an area where, as we see pro bono develop as an infrastructure and programs, pro bono for 501c3s will be very much a growth area.
So I want to ask your opinion about the idea of mandatory pro bono. What is your opinion about, and I know people have very strong opinions about this, especially in private practice at firms, about whether or not lawyers should be required to do pro bono. And I know in New York, it's pretty much not mandatory, but it is reported and it's highly recommended.
Mm-hmm.
But I then lateral to Texas where it's not. And the thing that I found that was interesting there was that the people who did it did far and away more than anyone I knew in New York.
Mm-hmm.
But then the people who didn't do any and had no interest and just thought it was a waste of their time.
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, pro bono is something where it's a little bit binary. So if you've never done pro bono before and then you do a pro bono case, you're likely to take on another pro bono case. So it's kind of like if you do it once, you'll do it many times. But if you've never done it, you might just keep never doing it. So in terms of the mandatory pro bono, I very much, I think as a person, prefer the carrot to the stick. I think that it's an interesting idea, and I frankly haven't fully formulated my thoughts on it. There's strong arguments for and against. But I will say that I think that building a culture and building tools and infrastructure to facilitate pro bono will hopefully go a really long way. So you kind of do have the regulatory measures, and perhaps they develop in tandem, but the positive aspects of pro bono, the social aspects, the recruitment and skill building aspects, the job satisfaction aspects, even marketing for firms that have a really particularly powerful impact. Those are all benefits of pro bono that I don't think have been fully utilized. And so that's sort of what I view Paladin as being a part of, but perhaps it is within kind of a broader regulatory regime longer term.
That was a very delicately worded and very lawyerly response.
I am a lawyer.
Which I greatly appreciate, and I couldn't agree more. And I think that it makes sense that people who do it want to do it more. And I mean, I also haven't fully developed my thoughts on it, and I go back and forth about what the obligations we have as lawyers are to contribute, kind of to society at large, to those who have less opportunity.
And those are really important things to think about. I think the legal profession has developed a lot in ways that perhaps were anticipated, but perhaps weren't. When you go back to kind of thinking about the profession in a vacuum, it really is kind of guardians of justice and democracy and heads of communities. And I think it's really important to think about how you can infuse that into the present realities of practice, particularly when private practice is so popular.
So what are your kind of goals in 12, 18-month plans for Paladin as you continue to build out the platform?
Well, I think that a lot of it is just like providing value and proving out the model. It's in many ways a new model. There aren't a lot of tech tools for in law in general, but certainly within public interest law. So I think that a lot of folks this will be kind of a first use case in some ways. So there's that. We incorporate it as a benefit corporation, which I think is really interesting and important. So instead of kind of the binary for-profit C corporation and 501c3, we incorporated under a new corporate form in Delaware as of 2014, which is the Public Benefit Corporation. And the idea there, and you see this kind of rising in some of the newer companies like Tom's Shoes or Warby Parker, is that a for-profit model with a public kind of social environmental purpose is actually a really way to have scalable positive impact. So that's something a model that we're excited to be a part of and prove out as well. And then there's just ultimately the access to justice kind of component is we want to prove out that technology can help increase access to justice and the prevalence of pro bono services and things like that.
That's really exciting. And I actually didn't know about that new form of corporation, but it absolutely makes sense. I think that especially among the millennial generation, I consider myself one, there is such a move towards kind of these social enterprise, purpose-driven businesses, because there is a belief that you can make money and do good. And it isn't this binary. And I think that that's also true in the law. And I think more people are starting to see the practice of law that way, that it's not just I go into nonprofit or I go into corporate law and, one is to do good and one is to make money.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. I think the lines are blurring, and I think it's good that they are. Those two worlds need to meet in ways that are mutually beneficial and less polarized. And same thing for lawyers. And that's kind of going to the heart of what Paladin is trying to do. Having a private sector job doesn't mean that you can't have an impact in the public kind of sphere. It quite the opposite, we'd argue. And so bringing those two worlds together is really important, I think.
Absolutely. And I think that it's so great that you're doing that. And I think that I couldn't agree more that lawyers should not have to choose between doing good and making money. We should be able to do both. We certainly work hard enough.
Yes. Yeah. Lawyers I have the utmost respect for them. Fantastic people. And I'm not just saying that because I am one.
I agree. I've actually, having done this podcast and, being around lawyers for the last few years, who I actually seek out as opposed to kind of the lawyers who are put in front of me through TV or, kind of stereotypes, I'm learning to love more and more lawyers. So I agree. But before I let you go, I just have two more questions for you. First, do you have any resources that kind of you used when you were starting your journey, whether those were books or people you reached out to or kind of strategies you use to kind of get you through that transition that you could share with people?
Yeah, certainly I would say that it was really important to me to talk with as many people as I could during that time. Often people know somebody who knows somebody who is the person that you really need to talk with. So I think lawyers don't kind of reach out, or they don't want to waste people's time, or they are concerned that their idea or questions are half-baked. But I would just encourage people to, when you're thinking about making a leap, you need to build a little bit of a network for yourself and a soft place to land. And you only do that through kind of asking for what you want and reaching out to people and not being shy about it. So that was a really important thing for me. And then there were a lot of, I think, resources on the internet about kind of starting companies and entrepreneurship that I encourage people to read. Nothing in particular is coming to mind, but there's just so many resources out there. And then find some community. There's particularly in New York, but in most cities, there are startup events happening every single night. There are co-working spaces that you can just drop by, and I'm sure they'll have kind of a list of events. And finding people who have done the crazy thing that you're thinking about doing is the biggest comfort of all. It normalizes it, because I think otherwise I would have felt too alone maybe to do it.
I actually really like the word normalize, because I think that is something I didn't appreciate enough until I went to my first conference, and not one of those like conferences I was supposed to go to or that I was sent to, on behalf of the firm. Not that there's anything wrong with firm conferences, but they're not necessarily the ones you would have picked.
Right.
And the first time I went to FinCon, which is a personal finance conference, which is like the nerdiest thing ever. But to be around people who kind of think about money the way you do and have thoughts about how to use money and kind of think about investing and are really ambitious with their goals just makes you feel less crazy.
Totally. Yeah. So, I mean, maybe you'll go to some weird events or some events that are not for you, but maybe you'll find your people or a whole new world that you never even knew existed. And that really happened for me. I mean, I had no idea that something like Paladin was even possible when I went to law school, but it was really because I found people who showed me that it was.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I started this podcast out of my first FinCon, and my first few guests were all former lawyers who I met at FinCon, who all volunteered to kind of get me up and running. And
I love that. You never know.
Exactly. And it's been so amazing ever since. And it's changed my life because it kind of opens up all these new worlds that I didn't know were out there and forces me to have these conversations. And to your point about networking, I'm like so introverted and always terrified that when I pitch somebody, they're going to say no,
Oh yeah.
And
I mean, I'm an introvert too.
I'm convinced increasingly that, that most lawyers are just introverts. Like, that's what we like. We like our books, we like our like arguments, and we like writing, and we're just best in small groups.
Totally. Yeah. And I think that's right. For better or worse, like sometimes you have to just like hold your breath and navigate some big groups to get to other small groups. So leap of faith for all the lawyers out there, I think.
Absolutely. So before I let you go, the very, very last question that I like to ask everybody who I have on the show before I let them go is, what do you think separates those lawyers who kind of struggle to find happiness in life with a law degree from those who are able to find happiness? I guess what I'm really asking is if you can give a tip for people who are out there struggling and trying to bridge the gap between where they are and where they want to be, what would you advise?
I think the first step is to ask the scary questions.
Ooh, that's a good one.
Because if you don't have a sense of what the problems are or the things you're afraid of or your concerns, you won't be able to solve them. So I think that kind of spooky discovery period is absolutely the first step. And then the second step is to take them head on, be proactive. It's not like none of this is easy, but it's so worthwhile. And I recently kind of went through a bit of a goal setting exercise for myself, like a 5-year goal setting, and started to think about what do I want my life to look like in 5 years? And what does that mean that I have to do this year? What does that mean I have to do this month? And actually starting to take seriously making my life dreams come true. So, and it's just a one step at a time thing. Things will change, of course, but asking the big scary questions and then taking little steps to kind of get to where you want to be, because that's ultimately what life's all about, I think.
I really like that. And I especially like that, you're kind of aware of the fact that your goals may change, but that it's really about kind of moving in the right direction and being self-aware to know enough to know what that direction is.
Yeah, I actually, I have, when I started Paladin, I bought this antique compass that I put on a necklace. And that's the idea there, is like, I have no idea where I'll end up, but I know which direction I want to go in.
It's so good. I love that. Well, I think that's as great a place as any to end this. So thank you so much for coming on today. I really appreciated chatting with you.
Yes, thank you so much. I love this. And I'm not sure if you distribute any information, but if anyone wants to know any more information or to chat about anything, you can reach me at Felicity@joinpaladin, PALADIN.com.
Wonderful. Yes, I will include links to the website and your information in the show notes so people can also access that online after the show.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining me for the Happy Lawyer Project podcast. Please head over to my website, www.thehappylawyerproject.com, for more information from today's show. While you're there, I'd love it if you'd leave me your thoughts on the show. You can also connect with me on LinkedIn, Facebook, or follow me on Instagram. If you've enjoyed the show, please share it with your friends. And don't forget to head over to iTunes to subscribe and review the show. As you know, each rating helps more listeners find the show and helps me get awesome guests on here for you guys. If there's anyone you'd like me to have on the show, or if you'd like to be on the show, head over to my website and let me know, or send me an email at Okema, OKEOMA, @thehappylawyerproject.com. A special thanks to everyone who's left a review, sent me an email, or reached out to me in any way. I appreciate you. Thank you again for spending this time with me, and if you would like to learn more about working in your gift and living your passion, head over to the website for a free gift. Until next time, bye!